The tray hit the floor. Hard tea everywhere gasps louder than the crash. Name's Mavis Langley, 70 years old, part-time server, full-time ghost around here. That cracked mug in my pocket. Last thing they gave me before forgetting who I was. Ever felt invisible in a room you built with your own hands? The tray slipped from Mavis's hands, teacups crashing across the linoleum. She can't even serve, someone said too loud not to be meant for her ears. The room had fallen into a hush for just a second, then resumed its muted chaos. Veterans Day was 3 mornings away, and the Silver Pines Veterans Center was a whirl of folding chairs, clipboards, and lukewarm coffee. Volunteers buzzed past her, too busy to look down. No one offered help, not even a handkerchief. Only the scent of burnt coffee and lemon floor cleaner lingered as Mavis dropped to her knees. A plastic spoon rolled to the edge of the table, spinning like a coin. She caught it in her palm with quiet precision, her cardigan sleeve slightly brushing the tile. The faded gray knit had once been blue, maybe. The little silver pin, shaped like a cross, just barely catching the morning light, quivered with her breath. It wasn't a true cross, really. It was a silver star replica, tarnished around the edges, but no one seemed to notice. No one asked. "Miss Mavis," a small voice piped up. Josie Colleen's girl crouched beside her, offering one napkin and a solemn frown. Her wide eyes flicked toward the other staff member who'd muttered the insult, but she said nothing. Mavis offered a smile soft as pie crust. "It's all right, sugar. No harm done." Neil Cardwell's voice sliced across the room. "Let's keep the hallway clear, Miss Langley. We've got inspectors next week." He didn't look at her, didn't wait for a reply. Mavis rose slowly, balancing what dignity she could salvage in her palms. She padded toward the kitchen heels worn thin from years on her feet. No one had seen the photograph above the coffee station. No one ever did. A black and white still framed in plastic showed a young army nurse huddled under canvas tarp, a wounded man slumped against her side. The photo had yellowed, and the corner curled where steam from the percolator rose every morning. Mavis passed it like she always did, like she always didn't. She disappeared into the kitchen's back alcove, where the air held scents of cinnamon and disinfectant. On the counter sat a jug of hot cider still sealed. 2 pumpkin pies lay boxed from Dottie's Bakery down on Main, the name scrawled in loopy ink across the lid. She'd picked them up herself on foot with coupons clipped from the Sunday paper. Walter Dean waited in his wheelchair just outside the swing door, a folded note trembling in his hand. "Mornin', Miss Mavis," he said, as if she hadn't just been humiliated in front of a room full of people. His voice was gravel and kindness. "Well, good mornin' to you, Mr. Walter," she replied, wiping her hands on a clean towel. He gestured with the note. "Think you ought to read this. When you got a minute." Her fingers trembled just slightly as she took it, her movements slow so he wouldn't see. She slipped it into her apron pocket, right beneath the faded star. The rest of the morning passed like soft snow on a quiet road, mostly unnoticed. Mavis stacked chairs, took calls no one answered, and refilled the coffee filter twice. Colleen passed her in the hall, smiled thinly, and didn't stop. At noon, when the sun slipped just past the gray edge of the sky, Mavis tucked into the pantry behind the kitchen and opened the note. The handwriting was firm, blocky. "Metal room, bottom drawer. You'll know why." She stared at it for a long time. Outside, the center murmured with soft conversation and the shuffle of tired feet. Someone laughed in the hallway. Mavis walked out slowly, her slippers brushing over old tile, and paused at the edge of the break room. Her eyes found the metal room door locked as always down the hall near the framed certificates and bulletin board covered in tack holes. Then she looked toward the coffee corner. The old photograph was still there, just as it had always been. She glances toward the locked metal room, then back at the photo hanging above the coffee station. For the first time, she really looks at it. Josie found Mavis in the linen room humming softly while folding flags with the same care a seamstress handles lace. The warm glow from the narrow hallway window barely reached the far corner where Mavis stood. Her hands moved with unhurried grace the corners of the American flags, tucked and creased with precision, that came not from practice but from memory. The hum was almost inaudible, like the tune lived only in her bones. "I didn't know we still used real flags," Josie said, leaning in the doorway, with the innocent boldness only 9-year-olds carried like a backpack. Mavis looked up slowly, the edge of a smile forming. "We do for the shadow box displays. The old ones mostly." Josie stepped in closer, nose scrunching slightly at the scent of starch and cedar. "You fold them different from Mr. Neal. His are all crooked." "Well, maybe Mr. Neal didn't grow up in a place where corners mattered," Mavis said gently, her voice like cooled tea. "Or maybe he just never met a laundry sergeant with a mean stare." Josie giggled, then tilted her head. "Did you ever meet one, Mavis?" Only smiled, returning her attention to the fabric in her hands. The triangle she shaped had no ripples, no uneven seams. It could have been framed as is. Outside, the soft patter of rain tapped like a quiet rhythm against the high window panes. Somewhere down the corridor, muffled footsteps echoed and faded. "I saw a picture once," Josie continued, her voice dipping lower, of a nurse holding someone in the mud. "Mom says that kind of stuff was real bad. Were you ever—" She hesitated. "Were you in anything like that?" Mavis paused mid-fold. Some things she said softly we never talk about. Not because they didn't happen, just because talking doesn't always help. There was no rebuke in her voice, but Josie looked down all the same. "Sorry." Mavis handed her the flag, now perfectly creased. "You asked kindly. That's never wrong." A knock on the frame broke the quiet. Tyler Dean, gangly and unsure in his school jacket, hovered with a cardboard box and a confused look. Miss Mavis, Grandpa said you might know how to get this to work." He lifted the old film projector like it weighed more than his backpack. Mavis wiped her hands on a linen towel and peered inside the box. "Real feed Kodak," she murmured. "Model 518. I haven't seen one of these in a long time." Tyler smirked. "Cool, right? We're using it to play that retro footage for the Veterans Day thing." "It's missing the spindle catch," she said, already reaching for the tool drawer. Within minutes, she'd tightened a bolt, slipped the feed lever into place, and smoothed the film leader through with careful fingers. Tyler blinked. That's amazing. I couldn't even figure out which way it opens." "Sometimes the old things aren't broken," Mavis said, just waiting for hands that remember how they work. The projector flickered to life, the reels spinning with a scratchy whir. Grainy black and white parades danced across the linen closet's back wall, flags, waving brass bands, marching men with haunted eyes waving from floats made of plywood and bunting. Josie leaned in, eyes wide. "Were you ever in a parade?" Mavis smiled but didn't answer. Instead, she reached for a cardigan sleeve that had slipped back. Josie caught sight of something just before it vanished, a mark on Mavis's forearm, half hidden, etched faintly into skin that had known sun and years. "Was that a tattoo?" Josie asked before she could think better of it. Mavis looked down. "Something I got when I was young," she replied. "Not for decoration. It looked like a cross, but different. It's a kind of red cross from another time." Later that afternoon, while the building buzzed with final checks and lunch trays, Josie wandered near Colleen's office. The door was open, and the brass key labeled Historical Archives. Staff only caught the light from the desk lamp. It hung above the filing cabinet, quiet and unimposing. She didn't touch it. Instead, she tiptoed to the metal room door, whose frosted glass bore the etched insignia of the center. Through the gap near the bottom hinge, Josie pressed her cheek and peered inside. Rows of shadow boxes lined the wall, some empty, others crowded with folded flags, black and white photographs, and nameplates. One photograph in particular caught her breath. A face so familiar, so much like Miss Mavis, looked out from the frame. Younger, hair pulled back, same steady eyes. That night, when the halls emptied and the lights dimmed to their evening hush, Mavis slipped down the corridor alone. She moved soundlessly, key in hand. The metal room door gave way with a quiet click. She stepped into stillness. Past the second case behind the storage locker, she pulled open the bottom drawer marked Unverified Commendations. Inside, wrapped in protective plastic, lay a faded folder with her name etched in pen, Langley M., Field Nurse, 1968. Below, a photo showed a hospital tent in ruins and a handwritten note from a colonel beside it. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached in. Mavis lights a small desk lamp and starts reading the document aloud, trembling field report. Operation Dustville. He said she carried a man twice her size for 2 miles, Tyler told Josie. But nobody ever believed it was her. The library wing smelled of musty encyclopedias and floor polish, humming softly with the buzz of Veterans Day preparations. Outside, a veil of morning fog blurred the outline of trees, but streaks of sun had begun to pierce through, casting gold slants across the carpet. Boxes of old photos and dusty flag holders lay stacked in crooked piles around the kids. Josie stood on a step stool, rummaging through a cardboard container labeled Archives, 1970s. "That's silly," she muttered. "Why wouldn't they believe it? Because people see what they expect to see." Tyler replied, thumbing through a folder of faded parade flyers. She was a woman, small, quiet, not exactly Hollywood's idea of a war hero. A few photos slid from a brittle manila envelope. One caught Josie's attention immediately. In the sepia-toned image, a young woman in combat fatigues was kneeling beside a soldier, one hand wrapped under his shoulder, her jaw tight with resolve. Dust hung in the air around them, the background a blur of chaos. "Is this her?" Josie whispered. They brought the picture to Walter, who was dozing lightly in the sun near the metal room hall. Tyler nudged his chair gently. "Gramps, wake up a sec." Walter blinked, then squinted at the image. For a long moment, he said nothing. His lips parted slightly and then trembled. "That's Mavis," he said hoarsely. "I'd be dead if not for her." He looked away, hand rising to his temple. Dustville. "We were boxed in near the ravine. Chopper was late. She got 3 of us out. On her back. She never stopped." He chuckled without humor. "They said I hallucinated. No record. No medal. Just memory." Tyler wordlessly took out his phone recording. In the office down the hall, Colleen barely looked up when Josie marched in with the photo. "We're prepping the lunch program, sweetie. Can this wait?" "But look, I'll look later," Colleen said, distracted by a call about folding chair deliveries. Mavis, meanwhile, wandered down the metal room hallway, unaware of the ripple she'd begun. Her steps slowed as she passed the media room where the Veterans Day slideshow was being arranged. The screen was frozen on a black and white frame, the photo Josie had found cued next to names of battlefield medics lost in service. Her own face stared back at her, 20 years old, and caked in grit. She turned before anyone could see and disappeared into the corridor. Back near the entrance hallway, Josie fidgeted with a strip of tape and a pushpin. Without asking, without waiting, She placed the photo on the wall, just above the guest book table, right where everyone would pass during the luncheon. "You're gonna get in trouble," Tyler warned, but didn't stop her. "If no one remembers her," Josie whispered, "then it's like she was never there." Later, as Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade swirled through the dining hall, and the scent of roast turkey drifted from the kitchen, guests in pressed suits and medals began to take their seats. Mavis quietly placed pitchers of cider on the tables, nodding politely unnoticed as always. Colleen and Neil stood near the podium, mid-conversation, Neil looking irritated. "She accessed files labeled staff only," he said in a hushed voice. "This is grounds for dismissal. We can't just fire her the day before the ceremony," Colleen muttered back. "She's unstable, Colleen, wandering into the medal room reading who knows what." A photo slipped from Neil's folder as he waved his arms. Mavis, passing with a tray, bent to retrieve it. She glanced at it briefly before handing it back. "Your father?" she asked quietly. Neil paused. "Yeah. Sergeant Cardwell. Killed in Nam. He was a good man," Mavis said. "He made sure the wounded ate before he did." Neil stared at her, the usual sharpness in his eyes softening for just a moment. The music faded into the next track. Then a rustle near the entrance. An elderly veteran in full regalia paused mid-step, staring at the hallway wall. His cane trembled slightly. Others turned to see what had caught his attention. He brought one hand slowly to his temple, saluted the photo. Then he turned, eyes wet, voice clear. "She's the reason I'm standing here," the man says. The room goes still. Colleen nearly dropped her clipboard when the metal room door creaked open, revealing Mavis standing inside holding a folder close to her chest. The golden light of late afternoon cut long, soft lines across the hallway, glinting off framed medals and the brass railings that lined the entrance to Silver Pine's medal room. The air had a stillness to it, not silence, but the hush before something begins. Colleen had been walking briskly toward her office, flipping through the checklist for the upcoming ceremony, when the sound of the door caught her attention. The medal room was supposed to be locked, always had been. Her heels slowed on the tile as the door fully opened, and there stood Mavis, calm, centered like a memory that had waited patiently to be acknowledged. In her hands she held a worn manila folder, close her cardigan sleeves pulled over her wrists. Her boots, military issue, cracked and leather still polished, peeped from beneath her hem. The way she stood was steady, like she wasn't hiding anymore. Mavis Colleen's voice faltered. "I thought you should have this," Mavis said simply, walking forward and offering the folder. Josie and Tyler trailed just behind, both wide-eyed but silent. The air shifted as Neil stepped from the conference room, sensing disruption. "What's going on?" he asked sharply. Colleen opened the folder. Inside was a photograph, slightly curled at the edges, and a typed field citation dated 1968. "Unverified commendation," it read. At the bottom, a scrawled signature, Lieutenant Colonel Harlan S. Cooper. "This can't be real," Colleen murmured, still reading. Tyler stepped forward. "She's in the photo we found. The nurse. It's her. And this," he added, pulling up his phone, "is Walter Dean saying so. On record." He pressed play. Walter's voice crackled through the speaker, steady despite its age. "That's Mavis. I'd be dead if not for her." Josie turned to Neil, expectant. But he folded his arms. "There's no official record. No DD-214. No VA documentation. This place honors verified service, not rumors and nostalgia." "It's not a rumor," came a voice from the entrance. All heads turned as a man in a tan jacket and veteran's cap entered his gate, stiff but proud. Mr. Childress, a visitor from Pittsburgh, paused when he saw Mavis. His face shifted, recognition breaking like sunlight. He removed his cap. She pulled me from a flaming APC in '69. I was pinned under the gun mount. Everyone else had bailed. She stayed. Wrapped my leg, dragged me to cover. There was gunfire. Neil looked at Mavis. Why wasn't this documented? Mavis didn't flinch. Because I was just a nurse. Because I was told I couldn't be there. Because people like me didn't get medals. Colleen stared at the folder again, then at the small triangle-shaped flag folded neatly on the shelf behind her, meant for Walter. Her throat tightened. Walter's grandson stepped forward, holding a fresh printed sheet. I found this in my grandfather's things this morning. He typed it last year. Said he was going to submit it before his health went downhill. He handed it to Colleen. The letter read, "To whom it may concern, I request that Mavis Langley be honored in the hall. Her service saved lives. We were told not to speak of it, but silence has done her a disservice. I believe history owes her better. Walter J. Dean, 2021. It was signed, dated, typed with clean intent. Neil opened his mouth but said nothing. For once, his protocols had no footing. Colleen's voice was quiet now. Why didn't you say anything sooner? Mavis looked to the tall windows where the sun filtered through in streaks of warmth. I said it every day, in how I folded napkins, in how I cleaned boots left by the door, in how I remembered their names when others forgot. Josie stood near her, not quite touching, but as if guarding something precious. On a table nearby, Tyler sifted through more folders. One file spilled open, and from it clinked a chain with 2 steel tags. He lifted them gently. Dog tags, he said. Langley M. The room held its breath. Colleen bent down slightly and whispered to Josie, "We have to rewrite the ceremony." Josie nodded. She has the key. She always did. The crowd hushed as Colleen stepped up to the podium. Her voice caught for a second. Then she said, "Today we honor someone you all forgot." The microphone picked up the crack in her throat. For a heartbeat, it wasn't clear if she'd be able to continue. Rows of folding chairs sat full scarves, wrapped tight gloved hands holding styrofoam cups of cider, still steaming in the brisk November air. Flags stirred gently behind the amphitheater stage, and the sun filtered through the trees cast a soft light over the crowd at Greenville Veterans Park. From her seat near the edge of the stage, Mavis Langley kept her gaze on her lap. Her hands rested atop a neatly folded triangle flag, the cloth still warm from being passed to her minutes earlier by Josie and Tyler. She hadn't wanted to take it. Not because she didn't care, but because it felt like something that belonged to someone else, someone braver, someone louder. Yet here it was, resting in her hands, as naturally as it had all those years ago, when she used fabric to bind wounds and comfort the broken. Colleen cleared her throat and looked up. Some people serve quietly. Some wear uniforms. Some wear aprons. Some are overlooked, not because they did less, but because they asked for nothing. There was a stillness then. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then the soft brass of a trumpet began, "God Bless America." A veteran choir hummed behind the melody. Near the back, a little boy wearing his father's oversized military jacket held his mother's hand tighter. Josie took the microphone next. She looked small behind the stand, but her voice carried. "This week I asked why we wait to give flowers to people after they're gone. I think we shouldn't. I think we should give them now while they can still smell them." She turned to Mavis. "This is one of those people." From the front row, Colleen extended a hand. "Miss Mavis, would you come forward?" It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a request. It was an invitation. Mavis hesitated. For a moment she didn't move. Then she stood slowly. Her coat rustled in the wind as she made her way to the stage. There was no spotlight, but she walked as if there was. Not with pride, but with purpose. When she reached the podium, she didn't take the microphone. Instead, she looked out over the crowd. Men and women of all ages watched her. Some looked confused. Others looked ashamed. A few had tears slipping down weathered cheeks. "This isn't just for me," Mavis finally said, her voice low but clear. "It's for those we left behind." Someone in the third row removed his cap. Then another. A wave moved through the crowd as veterans from different wars stood their heads bowed. There was no cheer, only clapping. Slow at first, then growing. It wasn't loud. It was reverent. Tyler stepped forward, holding the framed photograph they'd found Mavis in the field, arm around a bleeding soldier, her face half-turned but unmistakable. He passed it to Colleen, who nodded to the city clerk standing by. Effective today, Colleen said the medal room will be renamed Langley Hall. The photo of Mavis will hang at its center. Not because she asked, because we should have known. Josie stepped up again, holding a slip of yellowed paper. "My grandpa wrote this last year," she said. "He wanted it read out loud." She took a breath and read, "She gave us stitches and soup and told us we'd make it. That's how we did." From the trees, the haunting notes of taps began to rise. A breeze picked up, sending a few amber leaves dancing across the stage. Colleen's shoulders relaxed. Neil stood near the back, arms crossed, chin dipped, not in defiance but in shame. As the ceremony wound down and people began gathering their things, Mavis stayed seated. The flag remained in her lap. She hadn't spoken again, nor had she needed to. Mrs. Halbert approached quietly from the refreshment table, pressing a paper napkin-wrapped slice of pecan pie into Mavis's hand. "You deserved better," she whispered. Mavis managed a smile, small but warm, as the crowd dispersed, folding chairs clattering softly. Mavis noticed a young officer standing off to the side. He wore a dress uniform with polished boots and a beret tucked neatly under one arm. He didn't move until the last of the others had passed. Then he stepped forward. "My father said you kept him alive," he said. Mavis looked at him, her eyes softening. She didn't speak, but the way her hand closed gently around the pie and the flag and the moment said everything. The medal room looked different now. Not because they painted it, but because people finally looked. Morning light filtered through the frosted windows, illuminating the shelves that once collected dust unnoticed. Langley Hall, the name freshly engraved in brass, stood quietly, a place that no longer needed to shout to be seen. Mavis Langley stood just inside the doorway, hands behind her back, eyes scanning the photos that had always been there but had until recently never truly been seen. The air was filled with a kind of hush that comes after a storm, not silence, but a listening. She had opened earlier than needed. She always did. The wooden floor creaked gently under her sensible shoes. Each creak sounded like memory easing its way out of hiding. The faint scent of lemon polish mingled with old paper, and a ribbon of sunlight caught the edge of a glass display case, making the metals within shimmer like dew. Josie arrived first, bouncing slightly as she walked in her scarf, a bright loop around her neck. "Miss Mavis, it smells like paper and polish in here." Mavis smiled. "Good. Means it's awake." They walked slowly past exhibits, photos, folded flags, medals pinned beside faded letters. But today there was narration. Mavis told Josie about the field tent near Chulai, about the way the helicopters kicked up dust so thick you couldn't see your own boots, about the soldier who'd lost both legs and still cracked jokes about Elvis. She spoke of how soup and kindness kept just as many alive as stitches and morphine. Josie listened without blinking. Every once in a while, she'd look at Mavis, not like a child watching an elder, but like a chronicler absorbing history. They paused in front of a new display, a folded nurse's uniform, a worn Red Cross pin, and a black and white photo of a younger Mavis, not smiling, but bracing. Below it, a plaque that read, "Service not Spotlight." "That's the photo from the coffee station," Josie said softly. "It never moved," Mavis replied. "Only the way folks look at it did." Footsteps echoed in the hall. Lieutenant Frank Moreno stood at the entrance, his uniform neat, a small bouquet of white mums in one hand. The brass on his collar gleamed in the light. "I brought these," he said, placing them by the photo. "He never stopped talking about you. Said you had iron in your bones and a hymn in your voice." Mavis chuckled low and warm. "Your father cried when I gave him a peanut butter sandwich." "I believe it," he said with a slight laugh. "He said it was the best one he ever had." Colleen joined them moments later holding a folder that looked official but slightly worn at the corners. "We've been thinking," she said, her voice gentler than usual. "You know the community college is starting a Veterans Legacy Archive. They'd love someone like you to guide it oral history's curation. I was hoping we could make it official." Mavis looked at her, one eyebrow slightly raised. "What would the title be?" Legacy Program Advisor Colleen said. Mavis nodded once. "All right. But I picked the T." They laughed. Even Neil, lingering by the door with his hands awkwardly folded, managed to smile. The tension that had once clung to the hall now seemed softened, like dust shaken loose and swept away. Later that afternoon, visitors trickled in. A teacher brought a class of 6th graders. One boy pointed at a photo of medics carrying a stretcher and asked, "Did they have cell phones back then?" His teacher smiled and said, "No, son. They had Mavis." A man who once called Mavis just the lady with the tray now lingered at a photo hat, in hand, his eyes wet. People weren't rushing. They were remembering. Not out of obligation, but out of quiet awe. Mavis walked to a small display case on the inner wall. From her pocket, she pulled out a brooch, gold, shaped like a dove. She pinned it beneath a caption that read, "For those who waited at home." Her fingers lingered for a second longer on the glass, as if passing memory into it. Josie asked, "Was that yours?" "It was my daughter's," Mavis said. "Not all heroes wore boots." As dusk approached, the hall emptied. The soft creak of wooden floors and the scent of old paper filled the quiet. Distant bells rang from the chapel down the street. From a small radio near the desk, Dylan's voice crooned, "The times they are a-changin'." The song floated through the space like a benediction. Before turning off the lights, Mavis stopped by Walter's photo. "We did all right, old friend," she said. Then, as she turned the key in the lock, she whispered to no one in particular, "That's enough spotlight for one lifetime." The hallway fell silent, and Langley Hall rested in the soft glow of memory. Sometimes it's the quietest rooms that hold the loudest truths. What once looked like a storage closet now feels like a sanctuary, because someone took the time to look deeper. We often pass by people who carry entire chapters of history behind soft eyes and worn cardigans. Kindness, it turns out, doesn't need rank or ribbons. It simply needs a place to land. So next time you cross paths with someone overlooked, pause a little longer. Perhaps they too carry a story worth remembering. Like a lamp in a quiet window, a simple act of grace can guide others through the darkest nights.